Lovely to see you all. This is cute in here, isn't it? It's nice. This is my first Sunday Papers Live.
It's not my first. But
It's not your first.
No.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us. My name is Ben Hurst. It's lovely to see you all. I'm the co-host of the Climate Curious podcast, and I guess that's the most relevant thing because I'm joined by my inimitable. How do you say that word?
I have no idea.
Inimitable. How do you? Somebody knows.
Immutable? No.
Immutable.
We don't know.
Inimitable. Maryam. I'll try again. I'm joined by the inimitable, yes, Maryam Pasha. Now, Maryam told me to shorten her bio. She doesn't like long bios. We always do long bios for other people. But
not for us.
You're not
please.
a fan.
No.
Okay, so Maryam is the founder of X Equals Productions, which is a creative studio that's focused on stories that can change the world. Ooh, yeah, you can respond to stuff. You don't have to just sit in silence. She is also the director and the curator of TEDxLondon. She's the co-host of the Climate Curious podcast with me. And since 2023, you've also worked with TED as the curator on their climate initiative, which is TED Countdown.
That's enough.
Okay, we'll stop there. But most importantly, Mariam is also the author of this incredible book, How to Speak So Others Will Listen. Round of applause. Well done, well done. And I say all of that to say Mariam knows what she's talking about. When it comes to speaking and when it comes to speaking so that other people will listen to you, Mariam is incredible. You've coached hundreds and hundreds of speakers. We're talking like world leaders and not that people like billionaires, but billionaires, which does count. That's a pretty big deal.
The good ones.
So I want to start by saying, firstly, congratulations on the book. How does it feel to be a published author?
Thank you. And just so you know, it's like very lovely for Ben to interview me instead of us interviewing someone else. So you have to excuse us because we do this in a very different way normally.
Yeah. It's weird.
How does it feel to have the book published? I have to say right now I have very mixed emotions. On one hand, it's been 3 years in the making and that's really beautiful. And anyone who you know who's written a book will tell you that it's a journey. On the other hand, I'm an Iranian woman and right now the world is not so great. So it's an odd time to do lots of promo, but if I can think of another time when I felt so deeply that we needed to hear a different stories from different people, I think there are a few moments over the last few years where that's been really true, and what now is one of those moments.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think that is definitely accurate, that now storytelling and compelling stories and different narratives to the ones that we've been handed are like fundamentally important.
Yeah.
I want to start here with a question about speaking. You're one of, I would say, the biggest influences on my public speaking journey. I think you were the first speaker coach I ever had back in 2018 when I did my first TEDxLondon talk. Woo! It was good. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And I think you're somebody who has platformed a lot of people in their first instance, loads of people who have ideas, who are not really sure what to do with them. I think you have a special gift of seeing people's voices, seeing the voices that people don't realize they have that other people need to hear. I'm wondering why this book and why now? Like, what is it about this moment that felt so important?
Thanks. Yeah. Well, thank you, Ben. It was fun to start that work together. Why this book? I mean, it was very practical, actually. I do a lot of coaching. I do it for TED, but I also do it for private clients. And they kept saying, like, oh, it's really good that we got to work together. Thanks so much for your time. We'd like to continue our learning. What is out there? And I went, oh, let me go read, like, all the books that are out there. And what I found is there's some really great books on, like, fiction storytelling. And there's some really great books on, like, the how of public speaking. Like, not the how of public speaking, the kind of the delivery and what to do with your hands and all of that kind of stuff. But there was nothing there that talked about the how. There was nothing there that said, like, we know why stories are important and we know what good storytelling looks like, but how do you actually do it if you want to develop your skills? And so it was a very practical reason. And actually it was quite a few of the TEDx speakers I'd worked with who harassed me for a very long time to write this book because I don't love writing. I love speaking. And I think that the work that you find in this book and the work that I do very much speaks to what you were saying before, which is that I really think that we need new ideas and new voices to get us into the future, because I think that the voices that have carried us to this point and the ideas and the stories, they're not going to serve us going forward. And if we just keep hearing from the same people, we're just going to repeat the same mistakes. But I also think it's unrealistic that if you've never been listened to before, if you come from, because of your identity or whatever it might be, where you've not been heard, that you can just stand up and speak in a way that's supposed to be brilliant and eloquent and charming and poised, with never having that kind of learning. And I've been thinking about this a lot with the book, about how so many of the really elite spaces, whether it's like private schools, or I discovered the other day a £6,000 public speaking course for 14 to 18-year-olds.
Whoa, was that your course?
No.
Whoa!
And I thought to
you might
myself,
have to start that one.
Yeah, I thought to myself, wow, like who is getting the support to speak in a way
Right.
that, and who isn't? And actually, it's the people who are not getting that support who are the ones we should be hearing from, because they may actually have the ideas to help us create a better future.
Yeah, and this is maybe a good segue into a question that wasn't the next question, but is an interesting one about imposter syndrome. Because it does feel to me like there is like I don't know if anybody agrees with this, there seems to be an archetype of what, archetype? Yeah, I don't know, of what a speaker looks like. In my mind, I go straight to like a Steve Jobs type person. Do you know what I mean? Steve Jobs type beat, black t-shirt, blue jeans, white guy, glasses. Seems to be like what we all buy into. And maybe sometimes what people consider to be the most compelling storytelling narrative. And I know that, like, for myself, for example, the first time I spoke, I was absolutely bricking it. Like I was really, really nervous. I feel like I like completely blacked out and came off the stage and basically vomited. But it was good. It was really good. You'll like it. But I'm wondering how you help people through this idea of imposter syndrome, because I know there's a chapter in this book where you speak about the idea of unsubscribing from imposter syndrome. I know actually you used to do a lot of research into it. So I'm wondering like how that journey has been for you and what that transformation has been in that area.
Yeah. So if we think about who was seen as a legitimate voice for a really long time, it was old, I would say grey men, but I mean old white men in grey suits, but they're a little bit grey. Right. You know, it was like an archetype. And then we did like this incredible thing where we progressed, and then it was middle-aged white men in black turtlenecks.
Yeah, the future, yeah.
And I actually think we've come a long way. I think actually if you think about really great speakers, you think about Michelle Obama, you think about Malala Yousafzai, you think about Greta Thunberg, you think about, it's not just them, right? It's not just what used to be considered. But what happened is I was asked back in, I don't know, 2017 or something, to give a TEDx talk on imposter syndrome. And I gave the talk, and I was going to write a book about it, and it was like a whole thing, because when I first found out about imposter syndrome, I felt like it had explained the way that I had been feeling for a very long time.
Right.
And I don't know,
your experience.
Are people here familiar with imposter syndrome? I don't need to explain it. Right. And so I was like, great, I finally understand why I feel the way I do. Let me go and like talk to other people who feel it, who don't feel it, who've overcome it, who are dealing with it, and try to find something, a way through. And as I had more and more of those conversations, something became very evident, which was that imposter syndrome is not real. It is, or the way that we've been taught, maybe I put this differently, imposter syndrome being a you problem is not real.
Right, okay.
Actually, what's happening there, and I saw this time and time again, is that you are just very accurately picking up on the subtle cues around you that have told you that you don't belong in that space. Because let's be very honest, if you are a woman in a boardroom, we just heard about, what was it, 5,
yeah.
You know, or if you're, let's say, a person with an accent in any kind of industry, if you're a refugee entrepreneur, if you're a person with a disability in the arts, if you're someone who's working class, I mean, I could just go on with all the things that make you fall outside the thing that's made us consider that the norm. And I would say that most people, in many ways, fall outside that, right?
Yeah, the majority of us, yeah.
But you actually have been told you don't belong. You have been told that you're not supposed to be in these spaces, not often overtly, but in very subtle and undermining ways. And then imposter syndrome comes along and says, why do you feel like that? Why do you think you're a fraud? There must be something going on in your mind that says there's something wrong with you. They made it a you problem when it's actually not a you problem. And so in the book, I talk about how actually it doesn't really help to say, oh, I have imposter syndrome. It's like, so what? So what now? What am I supposed to, what am I supposed to do with that? Because, and if you try to, and if you, once you locate something internally, you try to fix something in you. But what if you were never the problem in the first place? And if you start to realize that you are not the problem, the whole way you approach this situation that you are in can change.
The book is like, this is such an interesting answer because the book is full of these moments of like acknowledging something that exists in the way that we as a society approach this idea of speaking, and then just reframing it slightly into a way that like helps a person to deal or cope with whatever it is that they're experiencing. As an example, let's talk about storytelling. I don't know how many other people in this room, or maybe let's do a show of hands. If you feel like you're a great storyteller, would you just raise your hand for a moment? Wow.
Why is it proud? Yeah.
That's actually very conceited. No, I'm joking. Don't put your hand up. Be humble. So I find this idea of storytelling really interesting because I hate it. I hate it more than anything in the world. I feel like, especially like the lower stakes it is, if you put me on a stage, I can probably bumble my way through a story. When it's like interpersonal, when you're chatting to someone that you've met on a holiday at a bar and they're like, what do you do for work? I always do this thing where I start touching my face and I'm like, oh, I just work for this charity, and I find it super embarrassing. Now, the idea that you talk about of storytelling in the book, I actually found revolutionary. And I remember when we were building the TED Talk in the first instance, there was this moment where you kept asking me for stories, and I was like, I don't have any. But you talk about stories maybe in a way that people might not have heard before. Because I've always internalized stories as being interesting stories about yourself. But actually, you talk about telling stories about data. You talk about telling stories about other people's experiences and all of these kinds of things. What to you is the definition of a great story, and why does that stick so much or impact people in such a powerful way?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that people say to me all the time. I'm not a storyteller. I don't have any stories. Or the work I do is too serious. I can't go in and do storytelling. Right. And I have a few things here. First of all, everyone is a storyteller, and I know that. Let's start there. Let me ask you, for the people who said they were great storytellers, I'm going to talk to everyone else for a second. When was the last time something like embarrassing happened to you? Not like embarrassing traumatic, but like embarrassing funny. Just think about that moment. It may have been recently. Now think about the first thing you did after that moment. You told someone about it. And then you subtly, maybe unconsciously judged how it landed. You thought about the bits that were funny, the bits that weren't. And then I'm going to guess what you did is you told someone else about it. And you told someone else about it. And over the last 5 years, you've now got like a tight 3-minute set to do, right? Where you can tell it because you worked on it. You got the laughs. You cut out the bits that weren't really landing. The thing is we all actually tell stories. It's the way our brains are wired, right? Jonathan Haidt calls our brains story processors, not logic processors. But we never really translate the natural storytelling we do in our personal lives into our work. And this leads to the next bit, which is that there's often a misconception that when I talk about storytelling in the workplace or in your community or on a project that you love, that I'm talking about you telling private or personal stories. And I don't mean that at all. You can tell those stories, obviously, if that's something you want to do, and I work with people who do that. But you can tell stories about data. You can tell stories about the weather. You can tell stories about something that happened to someone else. I mean, an example I use is there's an incredible woman called Margaret Heffernan, and she gave a TED talk called Forget the Pecking Order at Work. And she opens with a story about research about chickens. She was not even alive, I think, when this research was done. It has nothing to do with her personally or privately, but it is a perfect way of bringing to life her work on productivity. So that's one thing, is that everyone is a storyteller. We just have to think about that translation piece. It doesn't have to be about something. You don't have to reveal something about yourself. Like this idea that we have to all take our darkest moments and reveal them, and that's the way that we have impact, isn't true. But when we think about the ways that stories land, the thing is I work a lot on climate change, for example, and we know that just listing a bunch of facts, it doesn't work, right? It's not how our brains hold on to information. And if you want to have an idea worth spreading, if you want to have a way of making positive impact in the world, maybe just a way of like getting a job, you know, the way you speak has to be memorable. It has to be sticky. It has to be repeatable. We're very bad at like just regurgitating a series of facts. Most of us have not done that since we were in some kind of education, right? But we are really good at telling a story, retelling a story we've heard, and they become little anchors. So like most people are not going to be doing a TED talk, but they might be doing a job interview, right? If you're one of like 20 candidates, the stories you tell are the things the person interviewing you is gonna remember, right? And then that unlocks more things. So they act as little anchors. They're ways that we remember. They become sticky. And I think that it's also just a much nicer way to communicate. It's much easier. I mean, I interview lots of great people in the book, but lots of people told me the minute I realized I could just tell stories, I didn't just have to like somehow remember a series of facts and communicate
Memorize
them.
A script, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
It became easier.
Yeah, this is good stuff, Mariam. You should write a book about this, man. This is good. This is interesting stuff. I want to land us in a place that is maybe a little bit more practical before we open up for some Q&A. So now is the time to start thinking about the questions that you want to ask whilst still actively listening to what is being said on the stage. And when we come to questions, please ask a question and don't just tell us loads of interesting stuff. Don't tell us a bunch of stories. Actually ask a question. But I want to think about, I guess, in practical terms, for anybody who's out here in the audience who's got a story to tell or who's got some kind of public speaking engagement coming up in the coming weeks, and they're maybe a little bit anxious about what they can do, or they're not sure where to start, they don't know how to build the story, what advice would you give to someone who needs to do some kind of public speaking task?
Sure. First thing I would say is that I don't want you to think about public speaking as just those moments where you stand on stage with a microphone and some cameras pointed at you, right? Mostly public speaking are just the moments where you need to convince even just one other person of an idea. And that can be in a meeting, and that can be, you know, your neighbor who you want them to stop letting the dog come into your garden or whatever it might be. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are so the book is divided into these three sections: planning, assembly, and delivery. And the thing is that when we think about speaking, we often just race to thinking about how am I going to stand, what am I going to wear, what are my PowerPoint slides going to look like.
That outfit is important.
It is though.
You've got to figure that out.
And we come to why that is later, but in the book, or most people just start writing. But you have to do some planning. And if we think about that planning piece, this is why I think that, for example, TED, whether you love it or hate it, has transformed the way people listen and the way stories are told, is the idea of focus. TED Talks don't try to do very much in 18 minutes, right? It's one idea, it's one thing, and they try to do that really, really well. They don't try to tell you everything in the kitchen sink. And so much of being a good storyteller and a good public speaker is actually about being an editor or a curator, if you want to think about it. You have to decide what to say and what not to say. If you try to say everything, it's just not going to work. So first, it's focus. That's number one. Figure out what you want to say. The next thing is to think about your audience. And again, I said that could be one person or a whole room of people. One of the people I got to interview for this book is Briar Goldberg, and she's the head of coaching at TED. So any TED Talk you have seen in the last 10 years, she's helped get it to where it is. So she's pretty experienced. And I asked her, like, what is the most transformative thing that you've seen a speaker or speakers do? And she said, the minute a speaker becomes audience-centric, when they start to put themselves in their audience's shoes and think about how their message and ideas are being received from the perspective of their audience, it is transformative. I know that person is going to give a great talk. So knowing your focus, thinking about your audience, right? And then just thinking about how can I not just relay a bunch of facts, how can I tell a story? So one of the other people I interviewed in this book is an amazing public speaking coach and a colleague of mine called Simon Bucknell. And he said, if you have an idea and you want to tell a story about it, but you're not quite sure what story, ask yourself the question, how do I know that's true? Because then you can think about the experiences or the evidence points you had and think about how you can tell a story. So for me, if you're wanting to get started, have focus, think about your audience, and think about the stories you can tell. All of those things will have a transformative effect just to start with.
And it's true. It is true. It does actually work. Just in case you're wondering.
Just one more thing I'm going to say here, actually related to that, is that people ask me a lot about like delivery. And the way I put it is this: really great delivery cannot save bad content, but really bad delivery can ruin great content you've been working on. I like to use food analogies in the book, and so I use this analogy where I say, let's say you who spent all this time like cooking a meal for a friend, right? You've picked the perfect recipe. You've bought premium ingredients. You've taken time and love in creating this meal. And then at the end, you kind of just throw it on the plate, stuff's leaking off the side, it looks like a mess, the plate is dirty, it's just not appetizing, and you put it in front of someone. It could be the most delicious meal in the world, but they probably won't really want to eat it.
Right.
Contrary to that, if you only focus on delivery and you serve them something that looks fantastic but tastes of nothing, that's not going to work either.
Right. So it's a balance. It's a balance, everyone. Find these and more gems in But no, I was going to ask you, before we go to Q&A, where do people find this book and how do people find you? How do people get in contact with you?
Look at that little piece of advertising. Thank you. 27th of March, this book is coming out. But incredibly, for Sunday Papers Live, they've got you some copies, which you can pick up. And you can also find me online, just my name.
You can
say it's going to be socials.
It's going to be a dash after this to go and find the book. I can feel it. I'm going to be watching to see who runs. Okay, we're going to open up to yeah, we are. Okay, we're going to open up for some Q&A. I can see 1, 2,